Good evening. We are just waiting for a few more people before we get started with our webinar this evening, Scotland by Sea. So for those of you who've just joined in the last couple of minutes, if you could scroll down to the bottom of your screen, and there is a button called Chat. And if you click on that button and then type in the box there where it is that you're dialing in from this evening, then it just gives us a sense of who is here this evening. I see a couple of people have already done that. Welcome to John from Toronto, and also Teresa from Moose Jaw. Teresa from Moose Jaw, welcome. That's first member I've seen from out west this evening. So glad to have you with us. And we've got Judy and Steve from Vancouver. So we're just going to give it another 30 seconds and we will get started. And okay. Okay, so what we're going to do without further ado, we are going to start this evening with our webinar, Scotland by Sea. For those of you that have just joined us, if you could scroll down to the bottom of your screen, click on the chat box, and then just type in where it is that you're dialing in from. Then we have a sense of who is here with us this evening. So we've got people from different parts of Canada, from here in Ontario where I'm sitting, as well as from out in Saskatchewan, and I see somebody from Vancouver. So welcome to everybody this evening, and let's get started. So first of all, the webinar tonight is about Scotland by Sea. This is our expedition program covering the coast of Scotland. And let me just reiterate for those of you who may have joined us for the first time on a webinar, what Wheel and Anchor is all about. And our core vision, my goal, is really about bringing travelers together. And when I say travelers, I mean people who, like yourselves, are already well-traveled, and have seen bits and parts of the world, and you're looking for a different experience, and you're looking to travel with like-minded people. So that's really what we mean by bringing travelers together, people who are like-minded. And when you share experience with other people that you know, who have similar sensibility and similar desire to see places, it just enhances the whole experience. And so we're really looking to make a real difference in what group travel is all about. My personal goal is to have each and every person in Wheel and Anchor, each one of our members, be well-traveled and well-connected. So when I say well-traveled, again, I mean that you get to explore parts of the world that you might not otherwise have thought of seeing, or perhaps parts of the world like Europe that you've been before, but you haven't done it in a more focused and intense way. So being well-traveled is really one of those things that I always say, it's what I want written on my gravestone, is that I was well-traveled and well-connected. And so again, well-connected, it's about meeting the people along the way, other members of Wheel and Anchor, but also people in the various countries that we visit. That's really part of the experience, is about meeting people from all over the world. So joining us this evening on our webinar, the team at Wheel and Anchor consists of myself. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor. You may have seen me before in one of the newsletters on our website. And also on the webinar is Cassandra McKinnon. She's our Senior Member Services Specialist. And so she's the person who, if you call in with an inquiry about a program, she will be able to give you lots of information. Cassandra's a terrific person to talk to, and she also helps us to process all of our bookings. Also on the call is Joel Curry, my right-hand man, and he is the co-founder of Wheel and Anchor and is also providing our technical support this evening. So hopefully nothing goes wrong, and if it does, we'll blame Joel. So the plan for this evening, what this is all about, how this is going to work, it's really about you. You are someone who is curious about cruising the coast of Scotland, looking at it from the water as opposed to from the land. It's a unique way to visit Scotland. And so my goal is to have you learn something about Scotland and about what this program is all about. I'm the guide, not just on the webinar this evening, but also on the program. I'm the host. of the Scotland by Sea program that's happening in May of 2020. And as you know, I'm a global explorer, and there's nothing I like better to do than to inform people and to educate you on what you can expect to see along the way. And our destination, of course, Scotland and her Isles, that we'll be visiting, as I said, in May of 2020. So that's what's going to happen on the webinar this evening. And so let me give you a little bit of an overview about Scotland. As you know, Scotland up in the north of the UK, and there is a lot more to it. When we think of Scotland, often we think about Edinburgh, Glasgow, the larger cities is where a lot of people go. And some people venture up into the Highlands. But Scotland has got over 800 uninhabited islands, or 800 islands in total, of which only a fraction of which, not even a quarter, are inhabited by people. And that's what makes this voyage so spectacular, is because there's so much wilderness to see. In fact, the seas around Scotland make up 62% of the overall sea area that belongs to the United Kingdom. So by far the most amount of marine geography for the UK is in Scotland, and the rest of the parts of the UK, England and Wales, make up the difference. And of course, we can't talk about Scotland without talking about whiskey, but I'm going to delve into that a little bit more. And just note, on the right side of the map, the part of Scotland that people tend to forget, the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands, which are part of this experience. So if you stretch out all the coastline of Scotland, if you were to stretch it all out, it would reach, I think, from Edinburgh all the way to Australia. There's that much coastline. We're going to get a little glimpse of that on this trip. The other interesting thing that you need to know is that no matter where you are on the Scottish mainland or anywhere in Scotland, you're never more than 65 kilometers away from a coast, which, if you think about that in Canadian terms, that's like from Toronto, that's not even to Barrie. So the country is a very coastal oriented type place. So let's look now quickly at the map of our program, just to give you an overview of where we're going. So you can see that we're going almost all the way around Scotland. We're going to start off by flying into Dublin, Ireland. So although the program is about Scotland, we're spending the first day and night in Dublin. That allows us to all gather up together before we get on the ship. And then we cruise up the west coast, hitting Campbelltown in the south, the Isles, the Hebrides, heading up to the Orkneys and the Shetlands, and then our journey culminates then our cruise culminates in Aberdeen, and we go then to Edinburgh for the last couple of nights. So that is the map of the program. And now let's delve in a little bit about the itinerary day by day. So we start on May the 19th is when we depart Canada. We've got a nonstop flight, which we recommend from Toronto, that goes right straight to Dublin. If you're coming from other parts of Canada, of course, we've got other connections available that will get you into Dublin on the morning of May the 20th. Once we arrive, we'll have a panoramic tour of Dublin that'll take us a little bit around, so you get a bit of a feel for the city. But Dublin is billed as one of the friendliest cities in Europe, and there's so many things to see. I've been to Dublin numerous times, and frankly, you can't visit Dublin without passing by Trinity College with its very, very old library, and there's this thing in there called the Book of Kells. Everybody goes into the Trinity College library to see this ancient 9th century manuscript. Not too far away from that, if you're not into old buildings, although Dublin is full of them, St. Stephen's Green. It's a very green city, Dublin, and so that's a beautiful park to walk around in. And the weather at this time of the year, well, it's a little bit unpredictable in Ireland and Scotland, but hopefully, if it's a nice day, St. Stephen's Green is a great place to walk around. And of course, Grafton Street, which is like the Bloor Street of Toronto, the main shopping street, very famous, lots of shops. Not far away from that is the area of Dublin called Temple Bar, which is where all the pubs are, the classic Irish pubs. So there you can go and grab a pint of Guinness. So you can't really visit Ireland without having a pint of Guinness. And if you're not into stout, I'm not into stout. I'm not a lover of that stuff, but I recall having some great Irish coffee. So there's a lot of things to visit, and we've got some nice time in the afternoon to enjoy, and perhaps even a glass of Irish whiskey. Since the rest of the tour is about Scotch whiskey, now's your chance to have some Irish whiskey while we're in Dublin. We're going to head out the next morning on May the 21st. We're going to embark on our ship, the Ocean Atlantic. Actually, it'll probably be an afternoon embarkation, so we'll get another morning free in Dublin to wander around before we head over to our expedition vessel. And this is her. She is truly a terrific vessel in the sense that she's a true expedition ship. In our winter time, she's down in the Antarctic, the Antarctic region, sailing around there. She's ice strengthened, not really necessary for this particular cruise, but a very stable ship for cruising the long distances in the rough waters of the South Seas down by Antarctica. So it's a nice thing to have. And in the summertime, of course, she's up in this region, the Arctic region. There's a lot of public space, which is what I like on the ship. She's almost 500 feet long at 13,000 tons, but holds just under 200 passengers. So it means that you're never short of a space by a window on one of the observation decks to be able to look out and watch this amazing coastline of Scotland go by. There's a sauna on board. There's even a pool on board. I suspect it'll be a little bit cool to be using the pool, but you never really know. And here on this picture, you get a little bit. You can find this as well on our website or in our magazine. That gives you a sense of the ship, and you can see that a good half the ship is devoted to the public areas. All of the cabins on board the ship are beautifully appointed. She was just renovated in 2016, so she looks very sort of stylish, Scandinavian contemporary. Of course, they all have private bathroom facilities, phone, TV, everything you can imagine. The cabin sizes range between 11 square meters right up to, which is about 120 square feet, right up to about 35 square meters for the larger suites. Most of them have either portholes or windows, but some of them, there are a few inside cabins available as well. But I really recommend an outside cabin for any sailing like this. In fact, the ship, what they did as part of the last renovation is that you can even drink the tap water in your cabin, which is kind of a neat feature, because I find one of those things you get up in the middle of the night, won't have to find a bottle of water. So they've really updated the ship. The environment on board the Ocean Atlantic is very casual. So it's not like a big cruise ship. There's no formal nights. You don't have to dress up for anything. This is a true, as I say, expedition type experience. It's all casual. And I know the question will come up. There is a small infirmary, so a little medical center, and they always have a doctor on board. Although we are very close to the mainland or the islands in most cases, so help is never far away, but people do like to know that they have a doctor on board. So we will, as I say, we'll sail out of Dublin, heading north up towards the Scottish Isles. And our first stop on the 22nd of May will be Campbelltown. And Campbelltown, as I'll explain in a little bit, is actually is one of the Scotch whisky regions. And so this will be our first chance to step onto the Scottish mainland on the so-called KINTYRE Peninsula, which is marked by this lighthouse, which if we get up early enough in the morning, we'll see it as we are sailing into Campbelltown. We'll have a chance to walk around the town. It is known for, among other things, the Springbank Distillery. It's not as well known as Scotch whiskey, unless you're a real Scotch whiskey fan, as others, but it's really something that's unique because it's, as I say, it has its own region dedicated to this area around Campbelltown. There's also an interesting heritage center here, which has a very cool German mortar, one of these bomb shooting machines. There's very, very few of them in the world. So it's for those of you that might be into sort of military artifacts, it's kind of a neat thing. It's parked out on the front lawn in Campbelltown. So a lovely place to start our first stop in Scotland. And I want to tell you a little bit about Scotch whiskey, though, because, of course, there's a lot more to Scotland than whiskey. But then again, you can't really talk about Scotland without talking about whiskey. That is the national beverage, if you will. And there's a few things that you should know about Scotch, which, first of all, like some other, call it branded beverages like a champagne or a port or a cognac. It's very protected, not only in the marketing, the name. Of course, you can't call a whiskey from any other region Scotch, goes without saying, but the way that they produce it, like they have German beer with their purity laws, they have the same sort of thing with Scotch. All Scotch, for example, has to be aged for 3 years. And the ingredients that they use to produce it all must be from the region. And there's a number of very strict regulations, and they've really been bolstering this in recent years because, of course, whiskey is now produced in other parts of the world, but Scotch is still very unique. And of course, a lot of Scotch is known for its peaty flavor. You've heard of those peaty Scotches, and you might wonder why that is. And it's partly because the peatiness, the peaty flavor that you get in Scotch actually comes from peat, which is, you probably know peat moss from your garden. It's this sort of earthy, grassy-like substance. And when they take that and they burn it or they smolder it so that the smoke gets into, it helps to dry the barley being one of the primary ingredients of Scotch whiskey. And that infuses this smoky flavor into the Scotch. As I mentioned before, Scotch comes from different regions of Scotland. And so I've made a little map here that shows you the key regions. And again, if you're a Scotch drinker, you're probably familiar with this. We're actually going to stop in 4 of the 5 Scotch whiskey regions. First of all, the Lowlands is one region that's known for whiskeys like Glenkinchie, for example, comes from the Lowlands. Campbelltown, which I just mentioned, is its own region at the tip of the KINTYRE Peninsula. Islay is probably one of the most famous ones. The Islay ones have distilleries like Ardbeg and Lagavulin and Laphroaig and so on. And then there's the Highland region, which also consists of the islands. And those ones you'll be familiar with some of them, like Glenmorangie or Oban. There's a bunch of other ones. And then finally Speyside, which is up. That's the only region that we won't actually touch on this particular tour. So it gives you a bit of an idea. It's very a significant part of whiskey that you know that they come from these different regions. And so we're going to get a sense of that as we go along on this tour. So we're going to continue up as we depart out of Campbelltown. The next morning on day 5, on May the 23rd, we're going to hit Islay, which is going to be our first stop in the so-called Inner Hebrides. You've probably heard of the Hebrides before. There's Inner Hebrides and Outer Hebrides. We won't actually be visiting the Outer Hebrides, but we are going to see a couple of stops here in the Inner Hebrides. The first one being Port Ellen. And the thing, when you sail into Port Ellen, you see all of these white row houses there lining the shore. So it's sort of a very quaint town. And then, of course, the green hillsides out in the background. So it's quite a stark contrast. It could be beautiful and clear, but it's almost as neat when you have typical Scottish weather. Dreich, they call it this, when it's sort of misty and foggy and it's sort of very mysterious as you come in. Of course, I'm always hoping for good weather, but you can't have Scotland without a little bit of that typical Scottish weather. You'll probably also smell peat as you sail into the town of Port Ellen, because this is really the heart of Islay whiskey country. And when we get into Port Ellen, we're going to head off on an excursion. And one of the key sites here is to see this 1,300-year-old Celtic cross. It sits in the middle of a cemetery, and I swear you think you're in the Highlander movie. I don't know if you remember the Highlander movie from back in the 1980s with Christopher Lambert. And so you see this ancient graveyard, this ancient cemetery with this cross in the middle of it. And it's just one of those landscapes that just sends chills down your spine. So that is going to be one of the highlights of our trip today. And also on the way back, we're going to stop in at 3 distilleries, we're going to pass by 3 distilleries. We don't have time to stop at them all, but we will definitely do a tasting at one of either Ardbeg, Laphroaig, or Lagavulin. And as I say, they all feature this peaty style of Scotch whiskey, which is quite distinctive. We'll continue the next day as we make our way slowly north up to Oban and the Isle of Mull. Oban is on the mainland itself, and we'll pull into Oban and we'll moor here. And from Oban, we'll have another excursion that'll take us across to the island of Mull. And so Mull actually means summit or headland. And the Mull of Kintyre, where the peninsula we just were, it's this very high cliffs at the end of a peninsula. And so we're going to see the same kind of thing here when we go to the island of Mull. We're going to take a ferry from Oban across the Firth, and then we're going to head off by coach over the island to a town called Tobermory. I think Tobermory in Ontario was named after that. And it's Tobermory, as you can see here, has got to be one of the most picturesque fishing villages in all of Scotland. The island itself is an inactive volcano, and the other key stop that we're going to make here is at Duart Castle, which is home to the famous MacLean clan, which dates back to the 13th century. And if you remember again that movie Highlander, you'll remember it was all about this battle between the MacLeods and the MacLeans. Well, MacLeans were based here at Duart Castle on the Isle of Mull. In the afternoon, we'll head back to Oban and we'll have a little bit of time to explore the town. Of course, there's a distillery there as well, Oban, of course, named after the town, and we'll sail out with a beautiful view of the island on one side of the ship and the Scottish mainland on the other as we sail again north and heading up towards the Isle of Skye. And if you have not heard of anything else about Scotland, then probably the Isle of Skye up in the Highlands would be one of those places you've heard things about. And it is truly a picturesque and the most famous place in the Hebrides Islands. You know the song, I'll take the high road and you'll take the low road. Well, that song comes from the Isle of Skye. So we're going to visit it here, starting at Portree, which is the largest town. We have to land there by Zodiac as the water is kind of shallow there. So we'll use one of the 20 Zodiac boats on board the ship to get over to shore. It's just a short hop. And we'll tour around this island, which is the largest of the Hebrides and has some spectacular scenery like the peninsula here that's featured. And here we're going to visit Dunvegan Castle, which is the home of the MacLeod clan. So remember, I was talking about the MacLean clan down in Oban on the island of Mull, and here we see the MacLeods. This whole island, the Isle of Skye, there's so much to see on it. We've only got the day to tour around. It's actually the second most popular place to visit in Scotland after Edinburgh. We'll also hit a distillery here because that is part of the tour. We're going to stop in at Talisker. It's the only distillery actually on the Isle of Skye, and you've probably familiar, if you know anything again about scotches, you're probably familiar with Talisker. You've seen the label in your local liquor store. So from Skye, as I say, from Portree, we will then head out sailing again north, hopefully catching some views of Skye as we sail north up. And we're now going to make our way along the northwest coast of the mainland of Scotland for our overnight crossing, heading towards the Orkney Islands. And we'll arrive in the morning of May the 26th on the Orkneys. Let me tell you a little bit about the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands, because again, we've all heard of them, right? We've heard of the Shetlands and the Orkneys. The Orkneys are the ones that are further south. They're just a few miles, or about 60 kilometers off of the coast of Scotland, and then the Shetlands are much, much further north. And these islands are known for their very dramatic coastline. They have these sea stacks, these columns of water that stick out of the sea. And on all of these islands up here, as you can imagine, because they're quite remote, there's really very few people that live on them. In the Orkneys, there's about 22,000 people, and on the Shetlands, not much more than that. So they are really, it's a very interesting place to visit, and one that most people don't often get to, which is why it's great that we're going to get a glimpse of them while we take this on this voyage. The Shetland Islands, of course, are almost halfway between Scotland, between the UK and Norway. So they're really remote up in the Atlantic Ocean, and they are strongly influenced by Scandinavian or Nordic culture. The Shetland Islands have a larger area and even more people than the Orkneys, even though they're quite far away. They're connected to the mainland by ferry service and of course by flights as well. So when we arrive in Kirkwall, which is on the Orkneys, it's quite a windy city actually. So we're gonna head right out by coach, and we're gonna head to the prehistoric village of Skara Brae. And Skara Brae was actually discovered by coincidence when a storm in the late 19th century, it blew off a bunch of the dirt and earth that had covered this up. Because it's 5,000 years old. And so it was only in around 1850 that they even discovered it. And they didn't even actually start excavating it until well into the 1920s. So it's, as you can imagine, been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's truly an amazing place to visit. You see this community that existed in a very, very remote part of the Orkney Islands. We'll head back in the afternoon to Kirkwall, where you'll have a chance, hopefully, to visit the northernmost whiskey distillery in the world, Highland Park. But you'll have leisure time to explore as well. Actually, a friend of mine that stopped or she was traveling for several days up in this area, and said that there's this great jewelry designer called Sheila Fleet. So I think specifically for the women, they have some amazing artisans that are up there, in particular this Sheila Fleet. So she said this amazing place to check out some of the unique jewelry that is done using some of the gemstones and so on from the area. There's lots of other little shops with the arts and crafts. It's a great place just to wander around and get a sense of what people do out here in this very remote part of the UK and of Scotland. We'll leave again in the late afternoon, early evening, hopefully catch a nice sunset over the Orkney Islands before we then head up to the Shetland Islands, crossing over the sea, and then in the morning calling in at the port of Lerwick, which is the capital or the principal port of the Shetland Islands. What we're going to do in Lerwick, of course, is we're going to take again an excursion that's going to take us to a few different sites around the southern part, around Lerwick, in particular the Broch of Clickyman. Now, what is a broch? Because there's all these interesting Scottish terms that we're not familiar with in English. Well, a broch is there's actually some debate about these things, but it's basically a hollow, round structure or building that dates back to the Iron Age. And there's several of them all over the Shetland Islands and even on the Orkney Islands as well. But we're going to check out the one at Clickyman because it's relatively close to Lerwick and it's fairly easy to get around. And it gives you a sense of, again, how people live, the community back in the Iron Age. Now, you can't visit the Shetland Islands. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see some of Shetland's famous ponies. These little horses are 2 to 3 feet tall, but they're actually super, super strong. In fact, they can pull twice their weight, so proportionally much more than one of those big draft horses. Of course, these days Shetland ponies are found not just in the Shetland Islands, but in different parts of the world, and they're famous in riding schools, and they're often as pets as well for those who can afford them. So hopefully we'll get a chance to see some Shetland ponies whose species dates back 4,000 years already. We'll also have a chance to visit Fort Charlotte in Lerwick itself, and we will have, as always, some free time to explore this interesting town before we get back on the ship in time for dinner. And then we set sail back towards the south, back towards the Scottish mainland, where we will then call in at Aberdeen. That'll be the last night on our ship as we sail down the east coast of Scotland to Aberdeen, which is the third largest town in Scotland. We'll disembark here after a week on board, say goodbye to the ocean Atlantic, and then board our coach and head down towards Edinburgh. After about an hour and a half drive, we're going to cross the River Tay at Dundee, and on the other side, we will hit St. Andrews. Of course, St. Andrews famous for the golf course, the famous St. Andrews Links, where the British Open was played for many, many years, and it's affectionately known as, well, not affectionately known, it is in fact the home of golf. I think golf started some 600 years or whatever version of it there. But there's a lot more to St. Andrews than golf. The St. Andrew's Castle, which is 450 years old itself. So you can imagine this ancient castle, and yet they were playing golf before the castle was even built. And in this castle, there's this bottle dungeon, which is pretty grim. So you can just imagine it's a very interesting place to visit because the prisoners were kept in this dank, dark dungeon. And so it's something that you really have to see. We'll get a chance to look at St. Andrew's Castle and also at the cathedral. St. Andrew's Cathedral is unfortunately only a ruin now. It was one of the largest cathedrals in the British Isles. But it's truly an amazing site. We'll continue on. We'll have lunch in St. Andrew on our leisure, and we'll head off to Edinburgh, where we'll pull in the late afternoon, and I'm sure we'll find a nice Scottish pub in Edinburgh. It'll be nice to spend an evening on land, getting our land legs back. And then on day 11, on the 20... I just forgot the date, the 29th of May, we'll have a full day in Edinburgh, our last full day of the tour. Edinburgh is one of my favorite towns in Europe. And well, actually, it's not going to be in Europe for much longer. We'll see what happens in the next month. But nevertheless, Edinburgh is truly a spectacular tour. We'll have a walking tour, a panoramic walking tour that will give you an orientation of the key sites of downtown. Of course, we'll walk along the Royal Mile, and we'll pass by Edinburgh Castle, which also sits on an inactive volcano. And you'll have time on your own, basically from lunch onwards, to take in Edinburgh. There's so many things to see. In fact, I might even recommend that you extend your stay and stay a couple days longer in Edinburgh, because one day just isn't enough. But nevertheless, you'll I think really enjoy Edinburgh. Personally, I'm a big fan of the architecture. I find it like no other place. It's very distinct from even London. There's of course a lot of historic architecture, but there's some very modern buildings as well that you'll find in Edinburgh, and it's this distinction that makes it a very interesting city. If you're a fan of the royals, you might go by Holyrood House, which is where Queen Elizabeth's home is when she's visiting town. Of course, if you haven't had enough whiskey, there's tons of little shops that will give you free samples of whiskey from the other regions that we didn't get a chance to visit on this trip. And of course, you might not know that, Harry Potter comes from Edinburgh, of course. J.K. Rowling wrote most of the Harry Potter series while she was living in Edinburgh. And of course, a lot of the film sets were done there as well. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, you can probably Google where the different locations are and check those out. And Edinburgh is also known as for being one of the largest festival cities in Europe. Unfortunately, our timing is we're just going to miss those festivals, but the Fringe Festival is probably a term you're familiar with. So that happens every year in August. Also the International Book Festival. A lot of festivals come to Edinburgh, and I frankly can't think of a better place. So that will wrap up our trip. On the 30th of May, we'll leave Edinburgh unless you choose to stay on a few days longer or see some other parts of Scotland. We'll fly out, a recommended flight happening via Dublin, and we'll make our way back to Canada. So this overall program that's happening, as I say, from May 19th to the 30th is at $7,980 Canadian dollars. As you know, everything we do is in Canadian dollars. And I want to mention as well, that pretty much includes everything, the meals. Well, I'll go through the inclusions in a second, but the most important thing that price is based on an outside cabin. So a lot of times you'll find that the price is some inside cabin, the smallest one on the ship. This is already an outside cabin, which is what I highly recommend. So it represents quite good value. There are larger cabins and suites available as well. But the program, as with most of our programs, includes your air, your cruise, your accommodation, transportation, guiding while we're on shore, the whiskey tasting, all the meals on the ship, a welcome dinner, a farewell dinner. I forgot to mention we're going to see the Spirit of Scotland show as well when we're in Edinburgh. So, and of course, my services from during the whole trip, from the time that we arrive in Dublin until we say goodbye in Edinburgh. There's not much that we don't include. Of course, insurance is optional and highly recommended, and the few other meals and beverages that you may wish to enjoy that are not part of the program. So if you have any questions, and I'm just about to go to the point where we answer the questions that have come in on the webinar, but of course, if something comes up that was not addressed on this webinar, then you can always contact us. You're welcome to send me an email. My email address, Gordon, of course, at wheelandanchor.ca, Cassandra as well, to book or to ask questions. Or general questions, you can send, of course, a message as well to info@wheelandanchor.ca, or just give us a call. So I'd like to take a few questions now. So this is your opportunity to, again, click on that chat button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions. I see a few questions have come in during the course of the webinar, and so I'm going to address those now. But if anybody else has a question, please pose it here. So first of all, from Julie, who said, what about how do we pay on the ship? Is it like other cruise ships? Yes, it basically is like other cruise ships. So it's a cashless situation. You simply swipe your credit card as you would checking into a hotel, and they give you a cruise card on which you can charge all of your basically drinks is the only other thing to buy, because the excursions are all included. There's no optional excursions, or anything that you might buy in the gift shop, any souvenirs. So there is a crew card. And Julie's also noted here about a question about laundry facilities. Yes, there are not self-service laundry facilities, but just like in a hotel, you can send in your clothes for washing, but they don't have dry cleaning on board. That's the only thing. So only regular laundry is available. Let's see. Next question from John. John said, is internet available? we all need our internet. Well, John, the ship does have satellite internet available. And it is available for a charge, so it's not free. Satellite internet is still quite an expensive thing, and it's really quite slow. However, it is there. But what I would say is we spend most of the time going, of course, around the coast and in the ports of Scotland. So the better solution, frankly, if you need internet, is to either use your SIM card from Canada. If you're with Rogers or Bell, just get the Roam Like Home package, which is, I think, $10 or $12 a day now. And then you can use your phone just like at home with the same package, the same data. And of course, when we're far out at sea, it might not work, but certainly during the day, when we are moored inshore, we will be able to use that service. You can, of course, buy a SIM card locally in the UK, which is the least expensive way to use the internet. So that's what I would recommend. Another question here about Trevor, how's the weather going to be? Well, if I knew the answer to that, Mother Nature would be out of a job. Well, it's Scotland after all. And in Scotland, as they say, if you wait a half an hour, the weather could be different. So this is end of May. So it is really essentially the beginning of their summer season or tail end of spring. The temperatures up in the north part of Scotland, probably ranging from the high teens, it could drop down. It'll certainly drop down to the single digits likely in the evening, but should be in the sort of 12 to 15 degrees, I'm going to say roughly during the day. It could be rainy. It could be rainy, misty. Scotland is not known for beautiful sunny weather, so you need to bring appropriate clothing with you. So it's cool. It's like our spring. I would call it like April in Eastern Canada. That's what we're looking at weather-wise. So you definitely need to be prepared for that. And on that note, I'll also mention about the seas. Generally pretty calm. The winds typically come from the southwest, but they're generally at their quietest in the May-June period. And we are protected for much of the journey. The ship has some pretty good stabilization in it, so you're not going to get huge rollers and so on. They're going to cause a lot of problems. But if you're prone to seasickness, I do highly recommend, and they work, either the patches or the bracelets and so on that you can get. Just ask your doctor. That's the best way, and I find that they're very, very effective for most people. One other question that was raised about optional excursions. Well, there actually aren't any optional excursions. We've included all of them in the program, so you don't need to worry about excursions. Everything that there is to do is is included in the program. And let me see, are there any other questions? No, that appears to be it. So I appreciate all the questions. And of course, if you have any more, you can contact us at any time, dropping us an email, giving us a call. Needless to say, we want to get all of your questions answered. And so I thank you all for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure to tell you a little bit about Scotland by Sea, our program in May of 2020. And I sincerely hope to see you on board and otherwise at one of the events. So thank you and have a great evening.